the East African community anthem. Welcome, Dereje. For those who are not very comfortable with Kiswahili, your neighbor can tell you that the content is very relevant to the conference. That's why I chose that anthem. It speaks about our resources, our industry, our trade, and the issues that really are the issues of the conference. Wellington, tell me how I should stand. All right, okay, so welcome, welcome Alvin. So I want to say that we have 4 very distinguished speakers, and the first speaker, one of the speakers is Rogers, who will be speaking later. Rogers is the economics advisor at the UNDP Kenya country office, and he has more than 2 decades of experience in this area, having worked as an economist and in academia and policy advisory in many countries, including Zimbabwe, Mozambique, South Africa, Botswana, Tanzania, and now in Kenya, also for the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. He has taught at the University of Zimbabwe, the Catholic University of Mozambique, and so it is clear to us that we are waiting to listen to a very experienced analyst and practitioner. And around this time, when we are dealing with the impacts and the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy and the trade in Africa and the region, we can only expect that Rogers Dlawayo is going to really help us in that area. We are also going to hear from Ikal Angelei. Ikal is well known here in Kenya to many of us. She is the director of the Friends of Lake Turkana. And Ikal is an indigenous rights activist with an interest in human, land, territorial rights, environmental and energy justice. She is very interested in resource governance and the citizens' participation in governance. And particularly, she has an interest in economic justice, political ecology, and the economy of indigenous land and territorial struggles, frontier expansion, and green territorialization. So Ikal is the Goldman Environmental Prize winner 2012 for environmental justice work to protect Lake Turkana. It is an ecosystem and communities. She has a PhD. She is a PhD candidate looking at political ecology of land formalization. So Ikal will be joining us in this session. In front of us are both Dereje and Alvin. I'll just tell you about Dereje before I speak about Alvin. Dereje currently is working as the executive coordinator of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. He is a published author of 2 books on Africa's development challenges. He has authored many articles and book chapters, as well as regularly blogging on development policy, the role of the state in development, governance, accountability, tax and development. And he has a keen interest around the issues of illicit financial flows. He has a master's in development studies and a PhD in economics, magna cum laude, from the Free University Berlin. And he's a lecturer he lectured for nearly 10 years, more than 10 years actually, at the Free University Berlin in the Department of Development Studies and Africa Political Economy, among other things. So that is Dereje, who we have here, and we are very, very happy that Dereje is here. We are happy. Can we just raise our hands and welcome Dereje? Dereje, we want to welcome you very warmly, and thanks for making it to to this conference. Mr. Alvin Mosioma is the founding executive director of the Tax Justice Network Africa, which is a Pan-African advocacy and research network of 31 members in 16 countries across all the regions. He's a leading voice on tax policy in Africa and has spearheaded numerous civil society campaigns in Africa since 2007. I think, Alvin, I met you first at the World Social Forum in Nairobi, January. That is how far this journey has been. So he has previously served as the chair of the Financial Transparency Coalition, FTC, and was nominated to join the Open Government Partnership as a member of the steering committee. And he currently serves as a member of the advisory board for the platform for the protection around tax in Africa, and on board of the coordinating committee of the Global Tax Alliance for Tax Justice. And he has worked in this area for more than 15 years. He has co-authored books, chapters, and articles. And he also has a master's degree in economics from the University of Johannes Gutenberg of Mainz, Germany. So that is Alvin Mosioma. And Dereje is here. I've introduced Ikal, Angelei, and Rogers. We could not have asked for a better, panel, a better, ensemble of speakers for opening for us this important conference on the 8th Pan-African Conference on Illicit Financial Flows and Taxation. These issues are very live and important to Africa's development. So we want to start off now in this opening session. Alvin will start us off, and then Dereje Ikal will speak next, and I'll go to Dereje and we'll conclude with Rogers. Rogers is listed as the third, but I want him to be the last speaker in that session. So Alvin, I don't know where you want to speak from. Please, you can come over. I'm told you come with your mic so that I can put on my mask and go back. This is the first time I'm moderating a conference after this season, and we are all learning how to do it well. I don't know whether I'm doing it well so far. So, but you'll come with your mic, and then we'll sanitize it after that. Please join me in welcoming Alvin to give us the opening remarks and the keynote address.
Thank you, Cyprian, for that introduction. Sometimes when people kind of present you in your profile, you realize how time goes. 2007 for me still appears to be yesterday, but it's quite some years. And actually the Tax Justice Network of Africa was founded, Cyprian, if you remember, at the World Social Forum in Kasarani. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to welcome you all. In organizing this, we were very worried. We had my colleagues from the Secretariat will tell you the numerous exchanges we had about going ahead with this meeting, particularly in this era of COVID. The Pan-Africa Conference, which is running on its 8th year now, has been a flagship event, not just for TGNA, but for key stakeholders that are focusing on issues of illicit financial flows and taxation. The last one was held last year, focusing on digital taxation. And it's a conference that has grown with time. Today we are speaking of over 10 co-conveners coming together to host this conference. It has become an important platform for the continent to take stock on where we are in our effort to curb illicit financial flows. So although the conference was started initially by TGNA, it has become a forum that is owned by more organizations than just TGNA. And as we speak today, this is the Kenya version of the Pan-Africa Conference, but there are other events that are happening at the same time. Colleagues in Zimbabwe are meeting today, in Ghana at the same time, and also at the same time we are having a virtual meeting, which I will encourage all of you to participate. So it is a multi-layered, a multi-centric conference, which we decided to curate it that way as a result of this COVID pandemic. Colleagues, the question of illicit financial flows is one that I think still is shrouded in mystery. When you hear the term illicit financial flows, what is that? And our role as TGNA has been really to try and contribute in demystifying that concept of illicit financial flows, and more importantly, the role that tax plays in financing economic development. And this could not be more clearer, particularly if there is something that we have learned out of the COVID pandemic, is the important role that the state plays or should play in economic development. For the economists in the room, you know that over the last decades, there has been a very big effort, particularly by the international financial institutions under the neoliberal agenda to limit the role of the state. And if there's a lesson we have learned out of that, is that as governments are under pressure to provide all kinds of essential services, and particularly in health, the central question that comes is where should the money come from that would finance that economic development? And it is for this reason that the Tax Justice Network Africa, with its partners across the continent, have been trying to advocate and push for fair and equitable taxation. As the old adage goes, tax is the price we pay to live in a civilized society. So with the pressure growing on the state to fulfill all kinds of obligations, citizens demand growing for healthcare, for education, for infrastructure. The question of how we resource that, how we enable, what kind of systems we need to put in place to enable the state to provide those services becomes critical for economic development, particularly of African countries. The theme for this year is really focusing on natural resources. And this is out of the recognition that for countries that are resource rich in the continent, as you know, there are many of those in Africa, how the systems and the policies that they are put in place to manage their natural resources matter. The African continent, back in 2014, developed a regional framework called the Africa Mining Vision, which was really a template of how the continent should govern its natural resources and maximize the benefit out of those natural resources. And this template looked at the different areas of natural resources, be it issues around revenue management, issues around artisanal mining, issues around beneficiation, issues around linkages. How do you ensure that the natural resource sector, as it is currently in the continent, is not operating in an enclave that is removed or separated from the broader economy? This template was really instrumental and has played a big role in many countries in terms of setting the framework for what the country should be able to do. And I'm very happy that as we enter into the next session, we'll be able to unpack this a little bit deeper and try to see from Kenya, what is it that is happening. A recent study by the UNCTAD, the United Nations Committee on Trade and Development, indicates that the problem of illicit financial flows is actually growing. Back in 2015, the Mbeki report estimated that the continent loses up to $50 billion. The recent study by UNCTAD estimates those figures at 89. That means it has almost doubled. And a big chunk of this resource leakage happens in the in the natural resource sector. A study that was conducted by Publish What You Pay, Norway, a while back, indicates that of the top 10 companies in the natural resource sector, they have over 3,000 subsidiaries in tax havens. Why is this important? As a country, our economic, and really, it's unfortunate that Cyprian, the song you are playing is not available in English. It was talking about how do we protect our resources? What kind of governance framework, economic governance framework are you putting in place to protect the resources that the country has? And Kenya has really, in its development, economic development agenda, focused on creating what they call an enabling environment to attract investment. And part of this pillar is what is aimed at creating an international financial center in Nairobi, the so-called Nairobi International Financial Center. The country is in the process of signing a number of double tax agreements, most recent one being with Singapore and Barbados. There's another one with Mauritius that is about to be signed. I think that it's in Parliament now for scrutiny. And as an organization as TGNA, we get very concerned in terms of the financial framework that the country is putting in place vis-a-vis the global framework. When you sign double tax agreement, and this is not just hearsay, you are opening up the country for possible resource leakage. When Uganda signed the double tax agreement with Mauritius, it happened around the same time that it had sold the rights for the oil fields to a company called Heritage Oil. Overnight, and this was part of the expose in the Panama Papers, overnight, Heritage Oil moved its residence, quote unquote residence, from the UK to Mauritius. Just an email said, we are now moving our subsidiary that is responsible for the mining in the oil exploration in Uganda to Mauritius. As a result of that, the country would have lost a total of $4 million as the company should have paid in capital gains, for the single reason that the DTA that Uganda signed with Mauritius said that the capital gains tax should be taxed in the country of residence. Uganda contested that, and it won that case. And this is just a tip of the iceberg in terms of generally the kind of financial policies, the kind of treaties that you are signing, the kind of regulatory framework that you are creating can mean either the natural resources are a curse, as we see in many countries in the continent, or they are actually benefiting the country. Colleagues, I don't want to preempt the detailed conversation we're having. I just wanted to sort of provide a kind of general overview of the centrality of natural resources, particularly for a country like Kenya that is in the beginning stages of setting up, of starting with the mining or with the exploration of oil in the northern part of the country. If we don't put our house in order now, it will be too late. It will be too late, and that's, I think, the centrality of the conversation we are having now. People ask, so how much are we going to lose? We can't tell that if we don't put our house in order now. The kind of policies we are putting in place, the kind of treaties, agreement that we are signing, all this matters now for a country. Otherwise, going forward, we see a big problem, particularly in the oil resource. With those few remarks, colleagues and moderator, I would like to declare the conference open and get into the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alvin. I was taking my notes keenly, and I'm sure everybody else was. you have pointed out some very scary figures there, and you have variably connected our development to the role of the state and the place of domestic revenues where tax is central, and therefore the whole conversation around where the money is going to come from if these services are going to be assured for our people. Thank you very much, Alvin, for that opening remarks. The meeting is now, the conference is declared open. I want to look towards Brian to see how we bring Ikal Angelei now on. Ikal, good to see you. I don't know whether you are seeing me. I don't know where the camera is. All right, thank you so much. So I introduced Ikal in detail earlier, and I want to now bring her on. Ikal will be speaking to us in this opening session. And Ikal, we welcome you. Please take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cyprian. Comrades, good morning, friends, colleagues. I'm the non-economist in the panel. So I am speaking from more a natural resource perspective, but also from a Northern Kenya perspective. The one thing, first, this is a very important conference, Alvin and team and all the other co-hosts. It is a very critical one because we can now see, as Alvin indicated, the importance of public healthcare, public water, public education, and all this can only be financed by the taxes that that a government can collect. So one of the things that I have always struggled with, again, the illicit financial flows conversation and discourse, I have engaged with it more from a natural resource perspective. And that's why in thinking through, I've always thought and argued that we need to deepen the conceptual approach of IFF from one centered on just illicit tax. I say this because you can see a very, when everyone's talking about a scramble for Africa, and it's very good to see Dereje, who's always taught me to focus on the state, the role of the state. You see the property, so we have all this, what's it called, compulsory land acquisition where natural resources are. So we then see that everyone is focusing on the resource, but then no one looks at the productive asset where this resource is found. So when the argument for looking at illicit financial flows and the question around, what do we do post-COVID, is that there is need to open up the argument around illicit financial flows away from only taxes to also appreciate that the place where the land, water, the ecosystem where these resources are found are productive assets. And if you look at the African continent, this assets, this land is usually compulsory acquired from communities. So the way it happens is that the value of the resource is taken without taking the value of the land or the ecosystem or water. And for me, when people talk about mispricing, this is an avenue for mispricing, because then you only look at the price of the resource, but then you don't look at the price of the productive asset, because the means of production of communities, and especially rural women, indigenous women, is taken away from them. Yet then the calculation or anything is looking at just the resources. So for me, in thinking around what do we do, post-COVID, around the COVID times, just thinking around it, because we know that, especially now with the prices, the market value going down, it means that extraction is definitely going to go higher, especially in countries where, dependency on resources for their foreign direct exchange is really going to mean that more and more governments are going to push for more extraction. And in that way, then it means that, more and more rural populations, indigenous communities, and for some reason, more resources are being found in indigenous communities is going to exacerbate the impact on this community. So really trying to think around what's the natural capital of the land and the ecosystems where these resources are found, so that the pricing around and the conversation around the value of the resource, whether we're talking about tax reasons or pricing reasons needs to be reconfigured. So that's why my argument around rethinking IFF away from the tax aspect. So that's the first one. A second thing that we're looking at, that I've sort of been looking at, is when I saw with tallow, when they were working in Turkana, the focus of just the price of the oil is what everybody was looking at. But there was really not much effort to look at the intermediaries. So aspects around who's providing the consultancy services, who's providing the other services that really contribute into the economy, but are not calculated. So you find most of the companies are not Kenyan companies, they're not paying tax in Kenya, mostly expatriate companies. And it's something that, not much work has been done. So you then miss out on consultancy, international property products, which are part of the service of the economy, which could contribute a key part of the services transfer in relation to not just the extractives, but the whole economy. So there's really need to think around within the extractive sector, and I'm looking at extractive sector from 2 points. Right now, there's a big push to transition away from the fossil fuels, but we also realize that the green economy, whether in whichever way, is going to push for cobalt, aluminium, there's going to still be extraction of minerals in whichever economy that we look at, whether it's fossil fuels or otherwise. And so in this particular case, with the Kenyan situation, there's not been much look into the global value chain of the tallow oil, and who are the designers, who are the companies. You have this Golda and Associates, you have all these various companies that are coming in to support tallow, but they're not really the focus, and everyone's looking at tallow. So we miss out on all this, and which are serious contributors into the Kenyan economy. And I think it is time to start looking at that. But finally, it's really understanding the labor concept. Alvin was talking about the UNCTAD report, and the UNCTAD report has brought out the gender aspect and the possibility, a gender approach to labor and bringing more women into the workplace. But even that report, if you look at it deeper, it really is just talking about diversity of women. It doesn't talk about the structural issues that around women's participation in the extractive sector. And most cases, like I'll take, for example, the oil situation in Turkana, the women who came into the workplace, if you look, especially from the local community, were not paid as much as the men. So you look at, it's a skewed, the normal argument around the gender inequities around payment for labor. And so this is something that needs to be looked at, and just to understand more within especially the Kenyan situation. So with the oil sector, we saw a very big focus on local content. We saw, we've employed, but it was very tokenistic, numbers of women. In fact, we sort of put the women in the photo op just to show this, but really a deeper analysis into how the labor question impacts, because if you really look at it within the African context, where natural resources are being found is where you're seeing an exacerbation of poverty. So if then you're providing labor, if labor is part of the reason for jobs and employment, having cash for households, why is the poverty level going higher? And I think those are questions that really need to be brought out into the conversation right now and into the post-COVID situation, considering especially that the debt servicing costs, right now is more than 50% of government revenues in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and in Ghana, according to the Financial Times. So we really need to ask ourselves key questions. I liked how Alvin talked about the need for thinking around, public sector financing. And so as we think about how the illicit financial flows debate and discourse has to happen, is really think around how we recover and reset, and it's powered by the gender needs and their capacities. So we really need to do a bottom-up approach and really look at this concept beyond just the taxes, but really think around the productive assets where these resources are found, and how best we can make sure that it's also a gendered approach and a bottom-up approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ikal. Thank you very much, Ikal, for that very incisive presentation, and you are really setting the tone of this conference, and we are benefiting from your experience in seeing practically on the ground how some of these issues are playing out, what we are actually seeing, the example of Turkana and the aspects around it, from land to the gender aspects to the structural problems, in this realization that poverty is being exacerbated in the places where extractives are happening, I think is an important question. She also spoke about the second, petition and scramble for Africa, and she already actually invited Dr. Dereje for us. Did you hear her do that? Yes, she did. She was very excited that Dereje is here, who they have worked closely on these areas, which then leads me to invite Dr. Dereje. They already introduced him in a bit of detail. Dr. Dereje, please come over and get us into the session. And you are welcome. Please, if you can come here so that they can project, and come with your mic, please. Yeah, come with yours. All right. Alvin, you are sure this is yours, the one you used? Okay. Well, all right. Thank you so much. So please, let's welcome Dereje to speak to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm introduction. But something that should not have missed in the introduction is that I was Alvin's boss for 8 years. I saw it. And now he is my boss the last 3 years. It is, I think, since February, my first live discussion in a meeting. Since February, it has been Zooming. I don't know if you are enjoying it. I'm really getting fed up with it. So, session within the framework of PAC on Friday on illicit financial flows and their international dimension and what African governments can do about it. So let me start by just with some anecdotes. When we started this campaign, Illicit Financial Flows, there were two very widely accepted shared perceptions. One was, whenever we had a public meeting, we asked participants, what do you think are the drivers of illicit financial flows, if any, from Africa, and to what extent? Invariably, the reply was, illicit financial flows is basically because of corruption in Africa. Corrupt African leaders are the drivers of illicit financial flows. This was a widely accepted perception. The second one was, do you think Africa gets more aid than it loses to the rest of the world or to the rich countries? Here again, invariably, the answer is, we are poor. We are living from their aid. How can we have more resources transferred to them than we get from them? So in short, this, the PAC conference and the campaign around it has enabled us to reverse this perception. I'm not saying corruption is not important, it is very important. But if you look at the extent of illicit financial flows and the share of corruption in it, it is as if we are told to focus on pickpockets and ignore robbers. Because 60% is through commercial business activities. Corruption comes in the 30%. The second one is the tale that Africa is dependent on the life support it gets from the North is also a wrong perception. Since we started this campaign, we have been producing figures to show that Africa is net creditor to the rest of the world. Africa is net creditor to the rest of the world. So along this perception change, we have also contributed to move the agenda further in public policy debates. PAC actually became a platform in which Pan-African institutions and civil society could converge to discuss the way forward. So, but this is only about the success. We have not managed, in practical terms, to even reduce illicit financial flows. As Alvin said, it is increasing. There are two reasons for this. One is African governments have not done their homework. They have not done enough to stop as much as they can illicit financial flows. The second is because it is a cross-border issue, the international dimension has not been considered. There is no, Africa countries are not yet united to push this agenda in their interest in international platforms. So the next phase of our campaign should be to force African governments to do their homework at home at the national level and to work at Africa level so that Africa's interests could be also defended at the international level. So we have to do the two things together. We cannot ignore the international dimension and focus only on the national one. We cannot focus on the international and forget the national level. So a combined campaign is necessary to do the homework and also to do the international duties. Thank you very much.
That was very concise. Thank you so much, Dr. Dereje, for setting out the issues for us to consider and have in mind as we hold this 8th Pan-African Conference on illicit financial flows. I've said in many conferences that these should be the most important, engagement and focus of all Africans, really. I know elections are important, a lot of things are important in this continent. We've just done the Tanzanian election, the Ugandan one is coming, and I know elections are important, and many, many other things are important. But these, in my view, as Alvin, as Dereje, as Ikal put it out, if you are not focusing on where you are getting the resources to provide the services, you can win all elections, they can even be democratic, but how are you going to deliver? So I am not downplaying anything. I'm just saying that all of us, whichever sector we are in, I certainly think that this is the thing where all of us should be focused on. Those of us who are in education, in healthcare, in whatever area we are in, I'm not downplaying the significance of that work. But this, in my view, is probably the most important area of focus where every African citizen should be interested and be involved. So thank you very much. We want to go to Rogers. I'd introduced him. He will be speaking to us virtually. And Rogers, we are very eager and expectant because the UNDP is ours, and then we are interested to know how the UNDP is involved in these conversations at the global governance level and in terms of how we strengthen the demand side of things. So Rogers is now there. Rogers, can you center yourself a little bit? You are on the edge of the camera. That's good. That's very good. So we will hand it over to Rogers now to speak to us, especially on the area of how we are supporting the demand side of civil society so that they can be agents of transformation, of making this voice and the demand stronger, and what's UNDP's role in this policy conversation. So thank you so much, Rogers, and welcome.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will sort of start with a few remarks and to put this discussion into context. And my few remarks will center on this, this quest for structural transformation in Africa. And I think that quest for structural transformation requires the raising the continent's productive capacity. And this can only be achieved by increasing investment in infrastructure. And when I'm talking of infrastructure, I'm talking of both physical and social infrastructure, promotion of technology and innovation for value addition, and boosting agricultural productivity. But to achieve this, this state is being constrained by the financial structures of illicit financial flows. So in a nutshell, I think the international financial flows actually undermine the structural transformation of Africa by draining the tax revenue and scarce foreign exchange. And that stifles economic growth, socio-economic development, and even weakening governance. In fact, our sister UN agency in 2013 actually had actually, UNECA actually raised this point. And this actually perpetuates Africa's economic dependence. So just to quote the figures, I think there's been quite a number of studies which have actually been highlighted this problem which we are talking about. And I'm sure the previous presenters highlighted that. And most of this is actually, the illicit financial flows are quite huge in the extractive sector. And most of it involves tax evasion, misinvoicing, fraud, and money laundering. And there is also quite a lot of corruption in this sector, even illegal exploitation of minerals. And the latest report, which actually has been quoted, UNCTAD, actually estimate that trade misinvoicing in the extractive sector, Africa loses every year $30 to $52 billion, US dollars. And the bulk of this is actually the under-invoicing of extractive commodities. And you tend to find that this is quite prevalent in low weight commodities, such as precious metals, gold, diamonds, platinum, and other commodities. And if you look at gold, the under-invoicing is about 77%. Diamonds is 12, platinum is 6, and other commodities is 5. So, and I think some of you who have been following the news, I think there was a story about 2 weeks ago in Zimbabwe of a lady well-connected politically who was actually caught at the airport with about 6 grams, 6 kgs of gold in her handbag, and she was actually going to Dubai. And when she was caught with this gold, she tried to even say, oh, it belongs to somebody who is well connected, who is actually high up in the political structures of government. Then she was disowned by that person. Then the next story was actually she actually took a wrong bag to the airport. And that gold was actually 99% pure. So which means actually, and we know the institution which actually purifies gold in Zimbabwe is actually Fidelity Printers, which is owned by the central bank. And also related to that is actually gold deliveries to Fidelity Printers have actually gone down over the years. So you can see the magnitude of these things. They happen every day. And it's not every day that these people are caught. They are caught when somebody must have sold them. So basically, to even give the magnitude, I think the figures have been quoted, and most of these figures are estimates. So you find that, per year actually, the UNCTAD report estimates that Africa loses 88.6 billion per year. That was between 2013 and 2015. And that is equivalent to 3.7% of the continent's GDP. And if you look at that figure, you find that most African countries raise an equivalent of about 18% of GDP as revenue. And now if they can actually, address this, you can find that they can raise enough resources actually to finance the SDGs. Because look at the number which actually UNCTAD estimated for 2016. They estimated that Africa needs 200 billion to finance the SDGs. And you also look at the numbers which Africa receives as aid. You actually find that Africa receives half of the 88.6 billion as aid. It receives about 48 million between that period. So you can see the magnitude of resources which Africa actually loses. And if you look at those resources, you find that most countries with high rates of illicit financial flows, they spend 25% less on health and 58% less on education. And now look at what we are experiencing now, COVID. So it means public services and even the education sector are under severe stress. And also you tend to find that if you look at these sectors, as the first presenter highlighted, the impact on gender is quite enormous. So you tend to find that, because of this problem, women tend to be disproportionately affected. Now, I want to go to how can we address these challenges? And I think this is where the role of even, international organization, even the UN and even UNDP, can play a huge role. And I think some of it, UNDP has been doing quite a lot of work in this area. And one area which we've been playing a huge part is domesticating the Africa mining vision. I know quite a number of countries, even here in Kenya, have done that, because that is quite important, because the Africa mining vision looks at the whole value chain of this sector, starting with prospecting, exploration, then you come to even issuing of licenses. And then when you go to mining and even, the revenue which comes from this sector. And the most important thing about this sector is, how do you transform this natural capital into other forms of capital? And I think that's where most countries have failed, because this is natural wealth. But how do you turn it into other forms of capital, into manufacturing capital, into social capital, into physical infrastructure, and so on? So really the domestication of the Africa mining vision actually talks about that. So we have been doing quite a lot of work. I know before I came here, I used to work in Tanzania, and we also supported Tanzania in terms of domesticating that Africa mining vision. But I think there also needs to be much more collaboration among regional and international bodies, such as the African Union, SADC, ECOWAS, International Monetary Fund, OECD, G20, and civil society and the banking sector. And of course, these days we are talking of how can we strengthen even tax administration and even enforcement through better regional, international integrated systems, facilitating tax information exchanges between government, between developing and developing countries. So, and also this issue of, how can we seal the loopholes of transfer pricing and even, increasing global asset capacity. Then the other issue is investment in data. And I think data is quite key, because we tend to find that most African countries don't collect up-to-date trade data, because collecting up-to-date trade data is quite important for you to even, see what is happening. If you analyze trade data and so on. And I think we've been doing quite a lot of work working with statistical organizations to actually make sure that this issue of collecting data and even timeous data is quite important. And of course, this issue of multi-stakeholders oversight is quite important on the exploitation and trade of natural resources. And I think there we have got the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And I think this is quite important. How can we work together with other multi-stakeholders? And I think here in Tanzania, in Kenya, we are working quite closely, even with civil society, to make sure that there is transparency in this sector. And of course, I think also where we play a huge role is fighting corruption and money laundering. How can we devote more resources to recovery of stolen assets and also protecting and supporting civil society organizations, whistleblowers, and journalists? Let me end by a few concluding remarks. And these two concluding remarks. And illicit trade and illicit financial flows are the biggest threat to the achievement of the targets under the SDGs. And if pragmatic steps are not taken to deal with them, attainment of the SDGs by 2030 may be a mirage in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Rogers. I've been shying away from calling your Zimbabwean name because Zimbabwean names can be tricky. You can mispronounce a South African name and it may not sound very good. So I've kept to Rogers. Thank you so much. Very important perspectives there. A very detailed, expanded presentation on the role that the UNDP is playing. I was taking those notes, and I think that this is very helpful. I want to take us now to a brief session. We know that time is really not on our side, but I want us to go into a brief session of reflecting from where Alvin started us, and we listened to Ikal and to Dr. Dereje. When Dr. Dereje spoke, I agreed with him entirely that we focus too much on corruption, which is an important issue, but we do not focus on the IFFs. But look at the connection, the nexus, Dr. Dereje. The nexus is that it is because of corruption that we allow for IFFs. It is because of corruption that the IFFs are possible. If we kept the transparency and accountability mechanisms and ensured that governance is institutionally and structurally strengthened, then we are even going to deal with the issues of IFFs. I saw that there's a connection there that I hope that Dr. Dereje can respond to very briefly, even as we move towards conclusion. I'm sorry I did not announce, I should have, especially those who are online, that please send in your comments and your questions. And those of you who have a very burning issue that you want addressed, please raise up your hand. We will give one or two of you a chance to ask a question. And Brian from the technical side is really ready to help us in that regard. But now let's come to the room and see if there's a comment or a question before we wrap up that opening session and move into the second plenary. Is there an intervention from the floor, from the participants this morning? Let me get my glasses. All right. There's a mic. Yes, we need a mic here. Is there anybody else? Let's start with that.
Thank you. Mukasiris Banda is my name, and I work with TJNA. My question to Rogers. You said transparency is key, making sure that you have got real-time data when it comes to trade. And they are working with national statistics agents. I want to find out from him if we have any agent in Africa, any country that has been successful, so that we see how we can motivate others to follow suit. Then the second one is just a comment that, yes, we talk about SDGs and service delivery, but what is very clear, I think, from the presentations that have been made is, if anything, when it comes to service delivery, we cannot afford to be minimalistic because of COVID. when you are talking about education, it's no longer about it's no longer about school buildings, textbooks, and everything. You're now talking about e-learning. So the burden that we suffer now is like a pole we are trying to climb, and the grease has been added to it.
That's quite that imagery is quite excellent, because I can now try to see somebody trying to climb the pole and the grease has been added. A very important comment, and I'm sure that one of our speakers will respond to that. Do we have anybody in the room who has a observation to make? Brad, do we have somebody on virtually who wants to ask a question? Raising a hand? No? Yeah? This one? Okay. Or a question or a comment? All right. Is that Rogers? Is he answering the question? From the chat. Thank you so much. This is Learn More from Zimbabwe. Do our political leaders have the political will to fight IFFs? And are they aware of the second scramble of Africa? And are they aware of the fact that some minerals are finite? How can we change the narrative as the civic sector? And she's now saying she picked the wrong bag. The lady in Zimbabwe, that's the one who is saying that she picked the Alvin, please, Alvin and Dereje, if you don't mind, please attend to these questions that have been asked. Is there political goodwill to fight IFFs? The second scramble for Africa, and the finite nature of some of the minerals. As we think of a resilient governance framework, rethinking Extractive's revenue from windfall based on a shared inheritance is important. And the extractive sector should have the capacity to support debt relief. All right. Also, the data collected is usually provided by the MNCs and the TNCs themselves. That is the problem with the data that we are actually gathering, and governments are really weak in this area. So thank you so much. Is there a question that I've left? Okay, and then we'll come back to you. I can see two more hands. Let me take the hands as you set me up on Facebook. Let's who has the mic? Yeah, there is my colleague there. Please introduce yourself and make your comment.
Thank you. My name is Monica. I'm from AJEC Africa and the Association of Women in Mining in Africa as well. I have three distinct questions. One is to Alvin on the role of the state. Over and above just setting laws and policies to curb IFFs, what more can the state do? My next question is to Dr. Dereje. You talked about the cross-nature, the cross-boundary issues, and how they're also an issue with IFFs. What can be done, actually, for these minerals? Our borders are very porous, and tracing them across borders becomes very difficult. I know you said there'll be a session on this, but I'd want to hear just briefly from you what can be done on this cross-border issue. Aikal and Roger brought out the issue of women being disproportionately affected by IFFs. And maybe, I don't know if it's from Aikal or Roger, what has the proposal of what can we do to safeguard women? What can be done to protect women from being disproportionately affected by this issue?
Thank you very much. Let's move to the other side, please. No. There is one last intervention there. Do you have a mic? Okay, go on, please. Go on, please. You can give him the one that is. All right.
Yeah, mine is for the UNDP country director. And my question is, you spoke very clearly about the issue, but my question is, in Kenya, what kind of programs are in place to support institutions like civil societies that are involved with this advocacy? That's one. And two, what does the donor coordination structure look like around the extractive sector? Who are the leads? What programs are they working on? And how can these programs continue to be very visible for institutions that are looking for support in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me read the last question that we have here. Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Bernard Ocheng, and I work with Econews Africa, and I have 2 comments. Number one is about the role these extractive companies play and their relationships with the government. The governments are best placed to deal with IFF issues, but if you look at the way they collaborate or the way they work, is like the extractive companies assume the role of government, to the extent that you find that even communities or places where these companies work, people expect from the private sector, which are the companies, than from the government. Now, COVID-19 even accelerated that situation further, because these people are responding to emergencies that communities experience, and they're not seeing the government. So how will it be even possible for government to deal with IFFs in that sector while their relationship doesn't have any distinction? And that is what is emerging and we are seeing. Then the second part of my reflection is about the post-COVID. I think one of the best time that the government should have seen extractive sector, particularly in Kenya, as an opportunity for economic recovery, it was now. And probably we'll be getting into detail more. I saw Moses in Jerusalem somewhere, probably will be getting more details, whether the government is even prioritizing this sector as a way of recovering from COVID-19 situation and the economic damage that has happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. The mask is why I was not identifying that you're the one. Can you imagine? So we have a question here, and it will be the last one in this series, that some major concerns confronting taxation are the imbalances in regional economies, especially in terms of tax policies, administration, and deviation, leading to tax practices that are actually tax malpractices in most cases. So the regional perspective that the Regia was talking about, and the policies that are happening at a regional and sometimes at an international level, how do we respond to those challenges? I want to pause there and start with Rogers. If you can bring Rogers back. Rogers, if you can respond to the interventions that spoke directly to you, then we'll go to Ikal, and then I'll come back to the in-person speakers. Rogers.
Okay, I'm trying to. Okay. Good morning again. I'll talk to a few things, and I think there's a colleague who asked about an example. I'll give an example of a country actually which has been quite successful in the way they've used their natural wealth, and I think that country is Botswana. I think you are aware that when Botswana got independence, it was one of the poorest countries. And suddenly they discovered diamonds. And they use those diamonds quite judiciously in terms of investing in, infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and even human capital. And some of the export proceeds, which they could not absorb, they set up a puller fund, which actually they actually invested the money offshore. And I'm sure most of you are aware that during the global financial crisis in 2007 and 2008, actually everybody was running to Botswana to ask them to borrow. And they refused. I think the only ones who were successful was the African Development Bank, who gave them a loan. But that loan, they even did not draw it down completely. Basically because they'd saved some of their mineral wealth for a rainy day. And I think if you follow even the example of Botswana, they managed to negotiate with De Beers, which was actually a monopoly in terms of diamonds marketing, and ended up having a sort of a public-private partnership with De Beers. And De Beers ended up like being an ATM for them, because actually that agreement, the government of Botswana ended up getting 80% of the diamond revenue. So I think those are examples which we need to learn from. And I think there are other examples from other regions, like Norway, even Malaysia, for instance. So I think those are the best practices which we should actually draw from when we suddenly find that we have been sitting on natural wealth. So, and I think there is a lot of learning from the Botswana experience and even from other countries, how you can manage your natural resources for sustainable development. I know there was an issue which came up about even that, the multinationals who actually do the mining of these minerals, they are quite strong, and they can even cook the books. And also our tax authorities, I think they lack the capacity to actually take them to task. And I thought I should highlight one area actually, which UNDP, we are supporting countries together with the OECD. We've come up with what is called Tax Without Borders, where we actually bring in tax experts from overseas who are actually quite experienced, who can actually look at these books of MNCs to actually see what they are doing. And this has actually helped quite a number of countries to actually get a lot of tax from these multinational corporations. And I think here in Kenya, actually, we are actually trying to roll out this Tax Without Borders initiative with the Kenya Revenue Authority. And I think these are some of the areas which actually we support countries to make sure that they get what is due to them in terms of tax from the extractive sector. I thought I should also emphasize one interesting thing, because I have heard people talking about the role of the state. And I think we need to be honest to each other here, that I think what is the issue in most African countries is that there is no social contract between government and citizens. Because I'm saying if I pay tax, I expect to have the government to provide quality and efficient public services to me because I pay tax. But what tends to happen is the reason why people are reluctant to pay tax is because the government does not provide these public services. So the willingness of people to pay tax is hampered by this lack of social contract. And I think if we really want African countries to mobilize, taxes to fund public services, we need also to talk, the debate actually needs also to talk about how can we strengthen the social contract between citizens and government. And I think this is key, because the reason why citizens don't want to pay tax is because of that lack of social contract. And the rich actually don't pay any tax. It's actually the poor who end up paying the tax. So I thought I should highlight those issues. Over.
Thank you very much, Rogers. There was a specific question, but you've answered it about how you are supporting civil society organizations so that they can participate more effectively in the negotiations, in the policy discussions, and to ensure that the natural resources of this country and the dealing with the IFFs in Kenya can be more effective. I think he answered that in passing. Can we have Ikal Angele to respond to the specific question about what needs to be done to ensure that the structural inequalities and the compounded problems for women around extractives and natural resources can be addressed effectively? Ikal, please.
Thanks, Cyprian. Just before I answer that, I think there's something that Alvin had mentioned earlier around sort of like the value chain, they're just really thinking around the value chain. I give an example. When the early oil was taken from Turkana to the port, and then it was claimed to be going to China, but China's later sold on to Malaysia. So it is critical for the country to know, what's going on, because where value is extracted, where value is ascribed, not only within its own territories, but also globally. And I think it's a very important thing so that you actually know what is the value. Considering what happened with the oil, it is very clear that the Kenyan government got shortchanged, but really doesn't know to what extent it got shortchanged. On the issue of women, I think, thanks, Monica, I think the biggest part is the conversation of women within the extractive sector is always seen as very tokenistically. Women are not at the center. They're not at the center of the conversation. They're really on the margins. And you from your own experience, with the women in mining, it really came in as a follow through to what's already happened. And even when you count we celebrate, one woman here and there. So it's really the women out who are in the top ladder who seem to get noticed, but then the concept around, the connection of social reproduction to the economy, the impacts to women is not looked at beyond, a job here and a job there, how many women are in the local content sector. I think there really needs to really start putting women's labor at the heart of the emergence of the global value chains and the IFF regime. And really trying to think, as women being at the center of this whole process. Because at the moment, and that's why we celebrate a successful conference here and there around gendered concept around women in the extractives. But it is not that. And it is very critical considering the impact of right now. Let's take, for example, the ECA report after Ebola indicated that around the health resources that were put into Ebola meant that health resources for sexual and reproductive health were moved. And we've seen the same with COVID. So it's very critical to, I like how the first presenter spoke, that we cannot, it's not about, removing resources from the other. And right now we've seen that resources with, COVID has taken away resources from the sexual and reproductive health, and it affects women. So women have got to stop being on the sidelines, but have got to be at the center of the conversation, not only within the extractives, but also within the economy of the country, but also of the continent.
Thank you very much, Ikal. I want to bring on Dr. Dereje. Dr. Dereje, Kenya is planning to borrow 1 trillion shillings. How much is that in dollars? How much is it? 100 million? $100 million. That's what we want to borrow. So 100 billion. Yes, yeah. 100 billion. 1 trillion is $100 billion. That is what Kenya wants to borrow to deal with the effects of COVID. We had already borrowed 347 billion. Which is about 35 billion. Now we want to borrow $100 billion so that we can deal with COVID. Now, what is going to happen, and somebody spoke about it here, is that our national revenues that are going to pay debt annually are now beyond half. It's Ikal who spoke about it. So it looks to me that in 5 years' time, nearly 70% of our national revenue is going to go to debt servicing. which means that we are not going to be left with any money to take care of a basic and very important services, healthcare, education, water, and so on and so forth. And then you look at how we are being shortchanged in this sector that we are speaking about, and I am a very concerned person. Let's welcome Dr. Dereje to respond to some of the interventions and concerns that came from the participants. Please, Dr. Dereje. I'll still request that you speak from here, please, if you don't mind.
Does it matter?
They will help you. They will help you to just come. Yeah. Yeah.
There were a lot of interesting questions that were raised.
Yeah, they will help you. Can you give him one of the roving mics? If you sanitize it, please. Thank you. Yeah, it's on now. It's on.
Hello? Hello?
All right. Are we okay?
Hello?
Yes.
Oui, oui. Okay. There were a lot of interesting questions raised, but I cannot deal with most of them. And also, I picked out three just to address them briefly. The first is corruption. The second one is the cross-border thing. And the third one is the issue of political will. Corruption. Whenever I say this thing, corruption is there. Because there is, actually, mostly when people talk about corruption, it is about bribery. Corruption is wider than bribery. And then when we talk about systemic corruption, we mean that institutions can be corrupt, not only individuals or political elite. But what, there is this perception that corruption is a genetic defect of Africans. So whenever I say about the importance of, the comparison between pickpocketing and robbery, they think this is the genetic defect speaking through me. But what I wanted to say by that is, in the first place, these secrecy jurisdictions where illicit financial flows go, why are they called tax havens and not corruption havens? The way for corruption misappropriation is channeled, stashing money in secrecy jurisdictions, is not because of corruption. It was the road was paved by tax evasion and avoidance. Corruption money, bribery money followed it. That is one thing, what I wanted to say. I totally acknowledge that, for example, kickbacks play a big role in illicit financial flows, in foregone income. I'm very angry as an African when an African minister or whoever forsakes the fortunes of a country for peanuts. All this, it's not about my emotional thing, but when we analyze, we have to not narrow the definition of corruption to bribery. Just another anecdote. There was, at the United Nations in New York, there was a side event organized by Nigeria about stolen assets recovery. So what's happening is Switzerland, Nigeria, and the World Bank have created a committee to determine how the recovered assets are going to manage. And then I was there, I was so angry. I had to be impolite and stand up and ask, how can those who have facilitated theft be fund managers? Switzerland is a notorious country where illicit financial flows go. Normally, they should have been on the accused in the dock, not managing funds to be returned to Nigeria. until 20 years ago, in Germany, you can deduct from taxes the corruption money you paid in Africa. So this is the point I'm carrying. First is to put it in relation, quantitative wise, and secondly, to see that there is an interrelation, but also the whole thing is not lost in bribery. Illicit financial flows has other drivers. That is what I wanted to say. When I say this, just let me another anecdote. You know the UK. The UK sits in a tax haven empire. 15 secrecy jurisdictions are crown dependencies and overseas territories. The British Virgin Islands alone, there are 34 companies registered per inhabitant. What are they doing there? So if we link corruption to and say even corruption drives illicit financial flows, we might not be analyzing correctly. That's what I wanted to say. So actually there was this anecdote. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of the UK, he invited some African leaders for a meeting, a summit, anti-corruption summit. And off the record, on the eve of the meeting, he was talking with the Queen. He said, I'm also inviting one of the fabulous corrupt leaders. He was referring to the Nigerian president. And then the Nigerian president came to the meeting and he said, forget about the insult. Give me back the money that are stashed in your secrecy jurisdictions. So what I wanted to do is to establish this relationship. Being driver, being facilitator is different. Corruption is more than bribery. Receivers, facilitators are all part of the corruption system. So that is what I wanted to say. The second one is the cross-border thing. It is not about this porous border between Kenya and Uganda. It is about the global thing. So now, even if we were to say illicit financial flows are possible in Africa because of corruption, why is it that Apple is not paying taxes in the UK, in Europe? So the thing is bigger than corruption itself. For example, if you may remember, or if you might have heard, the European Court ruled that the Republic of Ireland should get back 13 billion euro unpaid taxes from Apple and distribute it to the jurisdictions from which these taxes were dodged. 13 billion. Is it lack of capacity? Is it corruption? Or it is because the way multinationals are structured is such that they can cheat taxes everywhere they operate. Even during this time of COVID, when you might have seen that those billionaires of GAFA owners are getting richer, 13 billion or whatever, and they are not paying taxes anywhere. McDonald's is not paying taxes in Europe. Just to give you a very, very simple thing, go and Google and find where brands of multinationals are registered. Okay? Alphabet, for example, where is it registered? What happens is they operate in Kenya. They say they are paying royalties and patent fees for the names registered in the secrecy jurisdictions. A payment you do on your activity here is tax deductible. The whole thing is happening. I can go into different examples, but it is just to say the way multinationals are structured is to evade paying taxes anywhere. That is why they are getting richer. That is why governments are not prepared to respond to COVID. That is the major reason, and that is the vehicle through which corruption and others also get illicit financial flows going. So the last point is about political will. By definition, it is not something that you can assume. We cannot say rulers have a political will to do this and that. If there were political will, then we have no raison d'etre. We should not exist as a civil society. Our task is to generate political will, to put pressure on governments, to create a situation whereby governments cannot be re-elected if they don't do some of the things we are asking them to do. So we cannot just say African governments are corrupt, there is nothing we can do, then we can PAC. So our effort, we are not guaranteed success, but all our effort is to generate the political will, to say not answering this question deprives you of the legitimacy to rule a country. So that is our very existence as civil society, as NGO, is to generate this political will. And this can usually take the form, incremental form, but there is nothing you can do. But at any rate, we cannot assume it, we have to generate it. Thank you very much.
We are requesting Alvin to respond briefly to the set of questions. And
yes, Dereje answered a number of the questions actually that I was to speak, but let me sort of speak to three things. One, I think it's really important for us to connect national, regional, and global. Because if we don't do that, we will be in that famous analogy of the elephant, where different blindfolded people who have never seen an elephant before touch a different part of the elephant and define it as such. This, particularly in the context of corruption, I think it becomes really, really important, even in the mining sector. And I think Ikal did speak to that briefly. When you have natural resources, gold or diamond or whatever, it matters where the company comes from. We have seen this in case in Tanzania, in our neighboring countries in Uganda. The fact that it is known to be a British company or a German company is not enough. Where it is registered matters to the revenues that you're expected to generate out of that. And the global system, the current global system, and Reja I think did speak to that, is at the heart of the reason why countries are not maximizing the resources that they are getting out of those natural resources. Why? Because you find companies registering their different subsidiaries in different places and then playing a cat and mouse game in terms of where they're importing particular services, where they're importing particular goods, where they're importing, and that basically has an impact to the extent that companies are not paying minimal tax, but they're not paying tax at all. And this is not just an African problem, it's a global problem. Amazon, Google, Apple, all of them together paying zero tax, zero, simply because of how they have managed to structure themselves. And this really emphasized the need for African countries to be on the table when it comes to global conversations of the whole global value chain. The second, building upon that, is, and we saw this actually happening, is when companies then pit countries against each other in what becomes the so-called race to the bottom, where you say, if Uganda is putting this on the table, what are you putting on the table? Uganda is offering me 5 years tax holiday, then Kenya says, okay, because I want you to come, I'll give you 10. Uganda is doing so. That harmful competition between countries, the only way to stem that is through regionalization and through regional effort, through regional harmonization. So Kenya cannot be an island, even when it is, the natural resources have been discovered within its border. It cannot operate in an island. We have to have a collaboration across borders. We have to have a collaboration at the EAC level. We have to have a collaboration at the Africa level. And it's through that collaboration that we can be able to address the challenge of harmful competition of countries pitting against each other and at the end providing. And this is really very characteristic, particularly in the natural resource sector, where companies, in addition to avoiding paying taxes, they are actually not, they're enjoying such a wide range of tax incentives that are significantly also reducing the amount of taxes that are supposed to pay. And these tax incentives are largely as a result of that harmful competition between states. And basically re-emphasizing the need for harmonization of tax policies and collaboration and cooperation at the regional level. The second point is the question, Monica, you raised about the role of the state. And this is basically depends on who you ask. The dominant ideology of neoliberalism defines the role of the state as purely facilitative, that the state really exists to purely create an environment for the private sector to operate, and then they believe in the power of the invisible hand, that if you let the market, you just create the market, then the market will address all the challenges. We have seen that this doesn't work. This ideology will never work. It has never worked anywhere, not even in those countries where that ideology is stemming from. The state has, of course, a very important role in terms of creating the enabling environment, the legal policy environment that encourages equitable growth. The emphasis here being equitable. That for job creation to happen, for SMEs to be able to operate, the state needs to put a framework in place that enables that to happen. Because not all jobs are going to be created by the state. We are not pushing for socialism in that sense. It's really ensuring that the state is creating an enabling environment for the private sector, for a fair competition, for a fair distribution of available resources and a fair allocation of resources. That's one. But the second bit is direct investment in public sector, and this is where tax come in, and somebody mentioned the question of the social contract, that for countries, particularly countries that are faced with the challenges that African countries, case of poverty and all that, the role of investment in equality. In quality public services is key for equitable growth and the structural transformation that was mentioned earlier. And lastly, just to challenge there's this notion that citizens don't pay tax or they are opposed to paying tax. I think that there's another narrative that needs to be challenged at the core. If you consume, you pay tax. There's a notion that of looking at tax from the salaried employees, that the payee. But recent studies by ETAF, the Africa Tax Administrative Forum, shows that over 40% of the tax that is being collected is from consumption taxes, is VAT, which has become very prevalent. So that notion, I think, challenging it also enhances the social contract, because what then happens is that because citizens then perceive that they are not taxpayers because they are not employed, because they are in the informal sector, then that social contract gets undermined through that, because then you start seeing the services you are getting from the state as favors. You start sort of saying, okay, whatever in the campaign period, we'll bring you this, we'll bring you roads, as favors from the state. Well, actually, it is something that you are the one contributing to that, and that, I think, challenging that narrative of particularly in a country where the informal sector is as big as it is really critical to be able to enhance. And we have seen this narrative changing. I think there was a time, I think here in Kenya, it was during the Kibaki period, where the former First Lady was being accompanied with a hairdresser and to an international conference. And the headline, I think it was in The Nation, was that this is what it could have costed the taxpayer. That concept of taxpayer is really key, because immediately you change that narrative from where there is, and Regis spoke about that, the idea that our countries are financed by resources that are coming from outside. Challenging that, I think, will contribute significantly to enhancing that social contract, strengthening that accountability, and then reaching to that point of political will, of manufacturing political will, of enforcing political will. Is not just the role of civil society, but it's the role of citizens in terms of demanding that accountability and the political will that comes with it. Lastly, the question of, there was a question that was raised about the leakage. Really, I think there's a huge conversation about what the government is doing with the resources it already has, which is a good conversation, which is a good debate that we should have. The resource that you have already generated, what are you doing with it? But at the same time, we need to have the conversation, how do we grow the size of the cake? Because so long as that size of the cake is small, it does not matter how you distribute it, even if you were to curb the leakages. Even if you are to ensure that corruption has been stopped, still that size of the cake will be small. We'll not be able to employ the number of teachers we need. We'll not be able to employ the number of nurses that we need. We'll not be able to pay them properly. So expanding that conversation beyond just how much budget focus, which is important, and looking at what are the other opportunities of growing the size of the cake and ensuring that as we grow the size of the cake, there is an equitable process of allocation of those resources. Thank you.